Who?
All right. The computer is telling me that we're live, but I never believe it until we check. If you are out there, if anybody's out there, tell us if you see us live here. Is anyone out there in the live chat? Love to say hi to the audience. Let us know if you're there and if you can hear us. This is Dean with me, Dean Lentini. Say hi, Dean.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Hope you're having a good night,
All
wherever
right.
you're at.
Yes. All right. Well, okay. So we're definitely live. It says 3 people are watching, although that could be that my computer's on. And if your computer's on, maybe it's just you and me watching ourselves. But
Well,
we'll
I
see.
am.
We'll get some. Yeah. I love watching myself.
It's
I'm
fun.
excited. Yeah. Great. I do see more people joining on. This is good. And I know there's a lot going on. So not everybody's going to catch this live. We'll have people that'll watch this after the fact. And I do see
Sure.
someone in the comments saying that they can hear us. That's
All
great.
right. That's helpful.
And blessings to you, RZ, as well. And Ghost Wolf just joined. Greetings. Awesome. Good. That's good. That's how we want to start. Well, we're going to get into some really interesting topics tonight about the theology of religious liberty, what we believe about that, what our thoughts are on that. And this is also going to tie into some things happening in Canada, which I just did a video about today. And Dean Lentini, my guest tonight, lives in Canada.
Yep, here in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan.
This is the epicenter of where all controversy lies, right?
Pretty much. It seems like it. Whenever you hear Canada, it's just like, what happened now? What's going on? Especially if you hear the term Canadian pastors, you're just like, oh, something bad happened. But yeah, it's been weird the last, year and a half now.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, it's been great for my channel, I have to say.
I'm glad you're benefiting, Tim. At
Yeah,
least someone
that's
is.
so keep it up. Keep it up, Canada. Just keep the controversy. Now, I honestly I feel sad about the things that I see happening. And the way that I would preface a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight, I know, and I said this in my video today, some people think of it as, oh, you're just being alarmist, but I have seen so many rapid changes in the last 10 years
Yeah.
that things I would have never expected, that I really feel like there do seem to be indications, like you're looking off in the horizon and you see those storm clouds.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say, well, maybe it'll miss us, but you start to say, that's looking like a storm maybe really is brewing. That's how I feel when I look at what's happening right now.
Yeah, I'm right there
So
with you, man. It's 10 years ago, I remember being in Bible college, and I came from a very similar perspective to you. As go to Bible college. It was a Baptist Bible college, so you're hearing all the eschatology put up on the charts, and you're just like, some of this sounds like a little out there. And nowadays, it doesn't seem as out there as it used to. Like that
yeah.
storm's getting pretty close.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the fact that legally things change, even here in the United States, in the last 2 decades, we went from in America having a marriage act, which was meant to protect what now is just called traditional marriage, the idea of a man and a woman, to now, gay marriage is completely legal in every single state. That was just an amazing, I think, bellwether of what's happening in the culture. Just a radical change of perspective in one generation. Of course, a lot led to that, but that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. How, because the culture has changed, it's putting Christians in a precarious position more and more.
Absolutely.
So I did get a comment just now about the Blue Jays hat that I'm wearing.
I was about to say it. Yeah. Way to fit in, man.
Definitely in honor of all those Canadians. I'm trying to, just really put myself in your place, identify with all of you.
I'm going to have to send you a Raptors hat, Tim. Like, I mean, the Blue Jays are great too. Like that works. Don't get me wrong.
Well,
But there's nothing better than the Raptors.
I would appreciate other sports right now because I'm really scared that baseball is not going to have a season this year.
Yeah, there's been some
They're
talk,
they're having a lot of they're having a lot of problems working things out. All right, well, let me just say as we get started here, thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Dean has a channel, and it says Biblical Theology for Normal People. I love that.
Yeah.
So this is Dean Lentini's YouTube channel. Please check that out. Subscribe if you want biblical theology and you are a normal person. Actually, he'll also talk to you even if you're not so normal. What got me first connected with you, Dean, was this video here, Why I Love the Christian Standard Bible. I watched that video of yours, and that really brought a connection because, as you probably know, I like the CSB a lot myself.
Yeah, that's been fun to kind of connect with a bunch of people. You and a bunch of other people came over to my channel from that one. It's been fun to bond over it. I love the CSB.
All right, now that one, is maybe 5 on controversy level because Bible translation. Let's
depends who you're asking. Those King James guys.
Dial up here. Look at this one. It says, "I disagree with John MacArthur."
Oh,
so
boy.
what? Yeah.
Oh,
so that's going to be a good lead into our discussion, Dean. Well, why would you ever disagree with John MacArthur?
3 words. I'm a Baptist.
We disagree with everybody, even ourselves.
There's that for sure. But part of being a Baptist is believing in the separation of church and state. And so when it comes to religious freedom, it's built into our DNA, goes as far back as 1644, the first London Baptist Confession. We have separation of church and state all over the place in there. There's, I think, 4 different paragraphs about the separation of church and state. So it's something that is very deep in our theology, really, how we believe that there is a separation between what goes on in the government and what happens in the church, and how sometimes, throughout history, that's mixed, and it's been pretty awful when it's mixed. So for us as Baptists, I look at a statement like what he made, and I know, it's a 30-second clip taken out of an hour-long sermon, and I'm fully aware that there's lots of perspectives on what exactly he was intending, but the words that he said, I disagree with them. I still like Johnny Mac. I still appreciate everything he's done. And that was kind of my main point, was to say, hey, I can disagree with somebody and still get along with them, or still think that they're a good teacher, still think that they're beneficial to listen to. This culture that we're in right now, it's, you either agree completely and love somebody, or you hate them and everything they say is wrong. And so I was kind of trying to argue for maybe just like a little bit of like the middle ground. But the statements that he made about religious freedom and not supporting it, it definitely it got me a little heated, gonna be honest.
Yeah, I can understand coming from the Baptist perspective myself as well. And I think, one of the things for us as Baptists is that whenever we hear someone say, like John MacArthur said, that they don't support religious liberty or religious freedom, it makes us nervous.
Yeah.
Just because of what our heritage is as Baptists. I mean, literally. And again, we understand John MacArthur was not talking about, persecuting other Christians or anything. We totally understand that. But when someone uses those words, I'm against, or I'm not really in favor of religious liberty, it just sounds a certain way to us. But it was in the context of a sermon, and I keep losing what I wanted to share here, but one of the websites I was looking at, and I did share it on a video, actually talked about how people in many ways we're taking that out of context. And I'm pretty sure you said that you watched the whole sermon.
Yeah.
So you were definitely not taking Pastor MacArthur out of context, and you still didn't totally agree with the way that he worded things.
Yeah. I understood that he was trying to say, the Biden administration at the time. It's interesting that this clip went viral just recently, but it went viral the first time, when he was talking about how we don't win down here. If you're watching and you remember that phrase, that's from this sermon. So this was I think it was January 12th or something like that, 2021, that this sermon was preached. So, at the time, Biden just entering into the presidency there. And so I understood what he was trying to say as, you can tell me all day that you're going to support the same things I support. But one, you don't know exactly where I'm coming from. And two, there are some other things that are going on. And then later he did want to talk about, some of the frustrations that he had about how people were applying their eschatology. You and I talked about this, Tim, a couple days ago. It's interesting. Eschatology, when you're learning it, it seems so futuristic and, almost in a way, don't take me literally on it, but it sounds kind of hypothetical in a way. It's like we're all theorizing about what's going to come in the end times. And so it sounded like a little frustrated at some postmillennialists and their view of basically, trying to win or create a theocracy. So for the people, it's interesting that we're upset and thinking that MacArthur was taking the most extreme view of where those statements could have led. It's interesting because just later he was going to, kind of tear that street, if you will. If he was going to go down, it was going to get bulldozed pretty quick. But he's basically frustrated at the administration coming in and giving him certain assurances that they were going to be fair. And then, also people's different positions when it comes to eschatology and how they were impacting, how they were living their lives and viewing, things that were happening politically. So I understand where he was coming from. And I don't take him, like you said, I don't take him nearly as far as how a lot of people who were upset about what he said were doing. But at the same time, that sentence does mean what it means. And, when you watch the sermon, I don't think it changes it fundamentally. It just changes how far he was going to go with it.
Yeah. And by the way, in the comments, if you have questions, feel free to put your questions or your own perspective on all these things. We'd love to see that live chat, some interaction there. I do see some good things there. So thank you. But yeah, this is one thing that came to mind from the Daily Wire, where it says clip of Pastor John MacArthur had critics pouncing. Turns out it was edited. But as you said, people were overstating their criticism, or they were overstating what he was actually getting at. Mm-hmm. I think maybe a more accurate way to represent what he's saying is, and someone actually brought up on my video where I was talking about this whole subject, Pastor Spurgeon, Charles Spurgeon actually talks about liberty. I don't know if you saw that sermon or that quote ever. Let me pull it up here.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, this is interesting. It says, liberty is the heirloom of all the sons and daughters of Adam, but where do you find liberty unaccompanied by religion? True it is that all men have a right to liberty, but it is equally true that you do not meet it in any country, save where you find the Spirit of the Lord. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Thank God this is a free country. So I think that's actually a more akin to what MacArthur was probably getting at is, and there's some truth to it. We're going to talk about that in the latter half of our discussion, right? Yeah, people talk about religious freedom, but then all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a second. Why are Christians suddenly in a precarious position if there's supposedly such openness? So I can't wait to talk about Canada and about Bill C-4 a little bit with you. I did have a Canadian comment on that whole issue, that he understands that right now, at least, pastors are being told that, if you're just quoting the Bible, that's fine. And I'm thinking, okay, is that going to be fine in 10 years? Is that going to be fine?
Yeah.
So we'll get to that. But anyway,
Okay.
getting back to MacArthur, that's what I think he's saying, is like, people are talking about religious freedom, but when you allow for basically false religions, false beliefs, it's satanic. And that leads to persecution of the church. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, like history shows that, it's like anywhere you see Christianity really take off, eventually, it gets persecuted. Even something that I look at and say was good, Constantine becoming a Christian, there are different ideas about why he became a Christian, whether it was political or genuine and all of that. And overseeing the Council of Nicaea, like Constantine did a lot of good. But we saw where that eventually led, with the idea of the government again being a little bit in control of what happens religiously. And of course, that was already happening under Rome with Nero and all of that, and the worship of Caesar. So we see it time and time again. So I could agree with that, as far as like that's where it will lead. But at the same time, I go back to like Roger Williams, the founder of Rhode Island. He actually was a minister in the Church of England. He was ordained as a minister there, and he saw some things about the government, and being able to actually say what religion really is in that country. And so he looked at it and said, this isn't right. And, eventually left, became a Puritan, came over to the Americas, founded Rhode Island, and stood up for, I think the way that he coined it, it wasn't wasn't religious freedom. It was liberty of conscience. That's what he was all about. And really the main point that he said about these, and you can go back and read some of his writings, his main point was that how will we be able to evangelize in a real way unless people have the freedom to accept or deny? And really it shows like, I go back to like the Bible Belt. I spent a year in North Carolina, and, the South is great and everything, and there's churches everywhere. But I went to work with a lot of, I worked at the post office, served at the post office. I love that they use that term, serving at the post office. But I went to work with a lot of people who professed to be Christians and were obviously not just in like, oh, they said a bad word here and there, but I mean, like, you could really tell that this person wasn't a Christian. But, when you live in that kind of a culture, it's a lot harder to tell, right, between who's a Christian and who's not. So if you give people freedom to worship as they see fit, well, then it becomes very easy as far as being able to know who to evangelize. And it becomes a lot more clear about where people stand on these issues. So I would go with Roger Williams and say that I think that what John MacArthur was saying is eventually true. But in the practical now, it's a lot better to have religious freedom, in that we can see clearly who we need to tell people the gospel to, and who's actually believing or not.
Yeah. Yeah. And something that always comes to my mind is, here in the United States, the Constitution and the First Amendment: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
When I'm referencing religious freedom, that's what I am upholding as a good thing in the context of America. But yeah, there's complicated aspects to that. I think that's what's coming out here. And I think a big question we always have to ask ourselves is, what is the biblical view on these things. And there's a part of you that says, we like exactly what you said, we should have freedom of conscience. And I think having a government that in general has that posture of freedom is a good thing. However, yeah, we all have to admit the other side of it, that if humans have total freedom without putting themselves under the authority of God, and in America here, I mean, and this, like we've always, or for a long time now, we've said we're one nation under God. That's something we eventually put into our Pledge of Allegiance. But I think we're really, I know practically speaking, that's not the case more and more. And I'm sure there's going to come a point where Americans are going to go, yeah, we shouldn't even have that statement in our Pledge of Allegiance. And that's bad news. That is really bad news. When you can have freedom, it's like anybody. If you have freedom, but you don't have the right character, that's going to go really badly. Yep. And I'm pretty sure one of our founding fathers said, that our Constitution and our government is only fit for a religious people, like people that have a sense of their obligation toward God, God's authority. All right. So, I think we're starting to outline what we feel about religious freedom. If anybody has any follow-up questions to this, I want to point this out, though. Dwayne up in Canada says, don't forget about Bill C-3 as well. It hasn't passed yet, but the type of ministry that Jeff Durbin has for abortion mills will be completely illegal if it is passed, and that's in Canada. So apparently there's another bill that could be passed that could also present a problem in fighting abortion. So sounds like Canada's really...
Man, I haven't heard about that bill. Maybe there's reasons why, but that's pretty alarming. We should be able to have freedom of conscience as well as freedom of speech to be able to say, express that conscience. But yeah, I'll have to look that up, Dwayne. I appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I want to ask you personally, and we're going to get into the bill in a little bit here.
Sure.
But as you think about religious freedom, I mean, this is why my initial, like kind of my gut reaction is to say, yeah, we should have religious freedom, because as a Baptist, we've always understood you need that freedom of conscience. I think that was really good. You pointed that out. And I believe that was actually in Charles Spurgeon's sermon that I referenced. He talks about freedom of conscience.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's really important to us. But at some point you start to see, there's this tendency, and you see it in Romans chapter 1, right? Where people, if they don't acknowledge God, they're not thankful, they're suppressing the truth. Look at the outgrowth of that. And then eventually as Christians, and Jesus said, in the world, you're going to have tribulation. He said that to his disciples. We should expect it, right? Peter said, don't be surprised at the fiery trial that you're encountering. So yeah, so for you, Dean, how are you thinking about all of this? Because even though you didn't come from Canada, that's where you're living now, and that's where you want to be long-term and even minister. Do you think at this point, like, yeah, I'm probably going to be persecuted?
Yeah. It's okay. At this point, I think it's probably inevitable. I, like you said, like, you're not an alarmist, neither am I. Like, even, through things going on with lockdowns and all of that, I've always been one who's like, all right, let's just calm down for a minute. These are about health restrictions and things like that. And, while still supporting, and praying for the Coates family and Tim Stevens and others who have been going through all these things for keeping their doors open. I didn't have that perspective that we couldn't, not wear masks or limit our size gatherings. And so when people were saying, "Oh, the church is being persecuted," I'm thinking, I don't think so. Now with Bill C-4, uh, those voices get a little bit louder and become a little bit more persuasive, because this does feel targeted in a way that, the lockdowns and other things. I know there's different perspectives. I'm not saying I'm the only one who has truth here, but I think that there's a little bit more targeting happening because of the language, really, that's not in the bill, but that's excluded from the bill, and especially when you compare it to past bills, it's it's very interesting. There's one word that everyone's focusing on, and I'm not sure if you want to go full into the bill yet, but there's language that's missing there that makes me think, okay, this does seem like there was forethought to this. In a lockdown and with the pandemic, and no one knows what's going on, and people are scared, and people are passing, different legislation about what can stay open. It's chaos. This isn't chaos. This they had time to craft things certain ways. This didn't need to get passed right away. Like all those kinds of things. So I think that now we can look at things and say, okay, even if you're not going to say the church is getting persecuted now, I think that it's inevitable that the true church, the church that's sticking to the word of God, that's preaching the gospel, which is very different than the physical churches that are here in Canada. At least I'll just say that. But that true church is going to get persecuted. I firmly believe that. At the same time, it's a question of, okay, what do you do about that? And for me, I do look at the Baptists in older times of when and just church history. For me, my perspective, and if other people have different perspectives, that's on them. But for me, I look at it and say that Christians become martyrs; they don't become freedom fighters. And so for me, I'm going to stick to the word of God. I'm going to preach it as I see it clearly. I'm going to be led by my conscience under the influence of the Holy Spirit. And I'm going to continue living a Christian life. And I would say that, for those who might be looking at Canada and being, like, what's going on? All of that, we need help even more now. If this is going to continue, and maybe things get backtracked. I'm not saying that it's going to turn into just total chaos up here. But we could see some wording added to this bill, or another legislation comes along and it kind of tames this down a little bit, or at least puts qualifiers on it. Well, things can change. But right now, looking at the road and looking at the past, it's not looking good, Tim.
Yeah.
And,
And
but
I
at the
gotta
same
say,
time, we got to preach.
yeah,
Yeah.
I gotta say too, like, even though I know you didn't necessarily think that, for example, Pastor Coates' situation, maybe you could look at that and say, yeah, that wasn't necessarily outright persecution. But what concerned me looking at that was the way the government dealt with it. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I get it. Maybe, I see that, maybe he could have been more compliant or something, but still, like, is that really how you're going to deal with your citizen who's trying to worship? And then they're literally fencing in their church and keeping them off their property. And
Yeah. It
it's
doesn't look
like,
good.
man. And yeah, that was something that was a little bit more gray area where Christians are going to maybe approach it differently. But the issue of like abortion, which was just brought up, the issue of marriage. I mean, these are kind of central to our moral structure as Christians. And so, man, if your government is willing to block you out of your church over COVID, what are they going to do when they have a bill that you're violating?
Yeah. And even like for me, I would argue that what pastors do is definitely not what the bill says and is against. But at the same time, like I said, there's not a lot of qualifiers in that bill. So are they going to be gracious and lenient and understand that? or are they going to take advantage of the vagueness of the bill? And then it becomes an issue of like, how cynical are you?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, let's look at some of the wording here,
sure.
because I think that'll show people what we're talking about. And I'm drawing here from the letter that I referenced today in my video, which was passed on to Pastor John MacArthur. But the letter that was given to him, I think, highlights some things that you're talking about.
Absolutely.
And I think this is key. It says the bill defines conversion therapy. So when you hear conversion therapy, everybody usually reacts to that and says, "Oh yeah, we don't like that." But
Yeah.
it depends how you define it. And it says it's a practice, a treatment or service designed to change a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual. Okay. Change a person's gender identity to cisgender. Okay. Change a person's gender expression so that it conforms to the sex assigned to the person at birth. Oh, okay. Now it's starting to, get more and more broad here. Repress or reduce a non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior. Repress a person's non-cisgender identity, or repress or reduce a person's gender expression that does not conform to the sex assigned to the person at birth. So they're not defining conversion therapy as like, doing something really harsh towards someone, which we would all be like, hey,
something
they're just
forced.
Talking,
yeah.
Right. They're talking about even repress, like if you're kind of helping, someone comes and says, I don't like what I'm dealing with, I want help with this. Technically, this is saying it's criminal activity to help them, is how I read this, just because of how they defined conversion therapy. In other words, if you're giving them biblical counsel, even like, hey, here's what the Bible says, it looks to me like that falls into their definition. And then I'll just add this quickly here. Everyone who knowingly promotes. I mean, what? So, yeah, I think what you just said, it could definitely be applied to a pretty broad, there could be a pretty broad application to this where they, and I don't think it'll happen right away. I don't think this year, but as the culture changes, what I'm seeing in Canada, I look at how people were treated with COVID, not just the government, but your fellow citizens up there. Some of them were really, really nasty, mean-spirited in the way they were looking at things. And I'm thinking, man. So I just, again, the storm clouds to me seem to be on the horizon and growing when I look at this. Anything else you want to say about the wording of this bill or the bill itself?
Yeah. I mean, like, even when you look at that, right where you're at right now, you can see it right there in bold, myth. Like, when have you seen that in legislation? Where the government is taking a stand on what people believe.
Right here. Yes.
So like, I understand, like there are some people who are running with that and saying, oh, they're saying that all of Christianity is a myth. They're not. They're saying that this idea that the biblical view of sexuality, that is to be preferred over, whatever sexual desire this individual has, that is a good thing, is a myth.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I've never seen wording like that in any legislation where the government is stepping in and saying, this is where we stand on this belief. This isn't some factual account of something that happened. This is a belief structure that the government is stepping in and saying is a myth. So like, that is incredibly concerning to me. And the fact, if you were to take this bill and look, I think it's bill is C-38, something B-38, one of the 38, I think is the name of the bill. But that's the bill that legalized homosexual marriage in Canada back in 2005. So long before the United States did it, it was legal up here. if you look at that bill, there's so much wording about, religious exemptions of certain things, making sure that clergy members weren't feeling forced to partake or to approve of, these what they would argue for equal marriages. So like there's so much wording in that bill compared to this one, which is just so, I mean, it's black and white, but it's so broad and vague, that conversion therapy means this, this, and this. And when you look at it, like someone could easily twist that to say that that's what pastors are doing, either in the pulpit or, in counseling scenarios. They are trying to convert people. Well, that's the whole point of Christianity. Like we want people to convert. And part of that, the whole idea of repentance is metanoia, turning away, right? Turning away from your sin toward Jesus. And so, yes, we would want them to turn away from all sin, So like whether that's drunkenness, whether that's some expression of sexuality that isn't biblical, any of those sins, we want them to turn away from that and turn to Jesus. That's biblical Christianity. And so here, they put it so vague, so broad that they can basically say that this is any Christian, not even just, people are concerned about clergy members, but like you said earlier, parents, we're going to have these conversations with our children. And, of course, now we're seeing more and more on TV and social media and all these different things that are raising questions within our children. And, what are we supposed to do as Christian parents? We're just supposed to listen, not say anything. Well, that's what the government seems to be implying with this. Conversion therapy is wrong. It's wicked. Like things that have happened here in Canada with conversion therapy camps and programs specifically aimed at teenagers. There's some really horrible things that have happened, things that dishonor God completely. And, that's not what any Christian who stands on the word of God is arguing for, but we want to be able to say what the Bible says about sexuality. But, this bill here, there's no wiggle room. There really isn't.
Yeah. Well, and I want to go back to what you pointed out, that it doesn't, in a technical sense, it doesn't say that Christianity is a myth. But when I think about it, in what they're saying there about basically the biblical perspective is a myth, the biblical perspective of our sexuality. I think it's an outgrowth of a worldview and value system that in essence does look at Christianity as a myth. In other words, in many people in the West now, they do truly have a secularized view of the world. They really do. And their value system grows out of that. And I think that this is just spillover of that reality. That's why that word crept in there, because they're actually kind of like admitting now they think certain things from their perspectives are a myth. The fascinating thing, don't you think it's interesting? Why would postmodernists ever look at a certain view and call it a myth as if it's false? Yeah. And their view is universally true.
Yeah, right.
So there's a little inconsistency. At the end of the day, people are going to make a choice as to what they're going to hold to. All right. Well, one other thing I'll say on this related to Canada, as if it's not controversial enough, someone actually shared an article with me that I think I have here. And if I can't find it, I'll just I'll just reference it. It's funny, I have all these articles, and then when I want to find them, I can't.
Right. You got to get a Mac, Tim.
That's what it is. Yeah.
That's the one problem.
I think you're gonna find a way, any way that you can, to promote Mac and blame my troubles on Windows, right?
I'm just saying.
You're just saying. I know.
Just try it first.
Yeah, and it's possible I just didn't pull it up. What I was going to say though is we're already, bringing up controversial things here, but someone
Sure,
shared an
let's
article
keep
with me
going.
about Jordan Peterson. He's very controversial from Canada. He is resigning from his tenured position.
Oh, really?
And now he's just going to become professor emeritus. So he isn't officially, I guess, in the position that he was in before. But one of the things he cited in that article was just how crazy things are getting. And he mentions at one point that the psychological practice, the practice of psychology, which is what he's been involved in, is being undermined by various things. And one thing he mentions is the way that they're talking about conversion therapy in this bill. And so it's interesting. And the point I would make about it is it just shows you how much the fabric of society is being torn, because he's not even talking about really like a Christian thing per se.
Yeah.
He's saying even his field of psychology is being threatened by the ideology that is, taking over really in Canada. So that's pretty interesting. Now, of course, he does, he's very sympathetic to Christianity. And I'm sure that, that plays into his thinking. But I still think he's just kind of highlighting something. And he obviously, he can be pretty negative. So, when you read his article, you kind of feel like, wow, things are really getting bad. And I want to make sure before we get to the end, we have good news, don't we? Like,
Yeah, we do.
as Christians, we don't have to feel super pessimistic. So let me ask you about eschatology, because I think since you
All
brought
right.
it up, Pastor MacArthur, he in his sermon was kind of taking a jab maybe at postmillennialism.
Yeah.
His view is premillennial, and specifically pre-tribulation premillennial, which used to be really popular. It's getting less so. Uh,
Yes.
but
Where are
it's
those Dallas
basically
guys at?
yeah, it's basically a pessimistic view, and I'm just going to put it out there that I still lean that way. I do see, because of the Bible and the way that it looks at Israel, and we're not going to get into eschatology. I'm just telling you that my eschatology does tend to be a little bit more pessimistic like his. And yet I still feel like there's an optimism of knowing that, look, we're here to be witnesses. And in the end, we all agree as Christians, the gospel is going to win.
Yeah.
The process getting there may look different depending on our eschatology. And I think that does
Sure.
come out. What are your thoughts though?
Well, I would agree with that last part, especially. Like, I think that all orthodox views, I should say, of eschatology
Right.
are optimistic because in the end, Jesus
Yes.
comes back.
Yeah.
So that's pretty great. But at the same time, like for me, like I grew up very similar to you, went to Baptist Bible College, independent fundamental. I came to Reformed theology a little bit later. So for me, like that premillennial, pre-trib, that's drilled into me. Like I could teach classes on dispensationalism. I've taken it so many times throughout Bible college and seminary and all of that. At the same time, as I've kind of come into Reformed theology, I'm viewing things a little bit different. So like I wouldn't categorize myself as a pre-trib premillennial anymore. I'm kind of up in the air a little bit. I'm doing actually a really big study right now to I want to firm things up a little bit. But at the same time, I can see like now that it's having such an impact on how we're viewing these things. There's so many postmillennialists who are actually arguing for a theocracy. Like they're theonomists. They want God to reign over the land, and like that might sound like a really great thing, right? Like I want God to reign, of course, but at the same time, what does that look like? Because God's not physically with us anymore. right?
Mm.
So then you got to rely on people like basically like the Church of England, right? Like you had to
Mm.
rely on someone to be the defender of the faith, or the Pope, or, you know, like have different religious structures that are holding this thing up and standing and saying this is what God says. So I don't think that the theocracy of the Old Testament worked as far as, you know, as soon as God said, hey, you guys can have a king, things went poorly, right? Like
Mm.
like things were great and then things went poorly. So I look at it and say, like, yeah, things are getting bad. And I do think that is some of that tribulation that's going on, some of the difficulty that we see as Christians. And, you know, but at the same time, I look at history as well and see that this thing comes and goes, right? That we see like Rome. Rome was awful. It was so bad, even worse than, you know, things that we've experienced in Western civilization. Far worse.
Mm.
And still, you know, the gospel came around, got through, and eventually society changed a little bit toward a more, I wouldn't say biblical, but a little, at least moral way.
Mm.
So we see these things of, you know, big tribulation. Everyone wonders, is this it? Is this the end? And then the gospel keeps going. The church keeps getting built by Jesus. He promised that it would happen. So like we can be optimistic in that way, even when things are difficult, and look at history and say, you know, this might not be the end, but we can see that society is definitely shifting right now.
Mm.
You know, if you had asked me this like a month and a half ago, I probably would have had a different answer, you know, until I really
Mm.
took a look at this bill. And now it's, I would like to say differently, but it's looking like, yeah, society is definitely shifting toward being anti-Bible.
So
And
you're getting back to premillennial
yeah,
dispensational.
yeah, you know, MacArthur used to categorize himself as a dispensationalist, but that, like, what was it, like a sinking
a,
dispensationalist?
a leaky
Yeah,
dispensationalist, I
leaky
think is how he put it.
dispensationalist. Yeah,
Yeah.
I might be, you know, going the other way now.
So Richard is giving some of his opinions on eschatology in the comments. Thank you, Richard. And one of the things he mentions, he used to be pre-millennial, I think dispensational, yeah, pre-millennial. But he says he's grown weary of hearing this and that about the Antichrist and the end days, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I understand that. And one of the things I will say, I do think we should always be very careful about having a myopic view, even if you hold to, like I do, I hold to premillennialism. I don't think America, for example, is the one lens by which you should look at everything happening in the world. And I get it. We all do that because, you know,
Yep.
we're born in a time and place. Imagine someone living in China their whole life, how they would look at the Bible, how they would look at the end times. And you
Yeah.
can see, you know, it's not just about one country. And what happens is when our country's going through bad times, that tends to affect our perspective. And I've actually been impacted by Tim Keller talking about in the
Tim Keller.
West, Yep, sorry, I'm bringing up more.
Ooh,
But listen,
controversial.
here's the point he has made though that really has, I think, given good perspective that in the West, it can look like Christianity's doing so badly.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look in the world, and by the way, I'm excited because I've got some pastors in Kenya. My church raised money. We're going to be sending hundreds of Bibles to them.
Oh,
Like
awesome, man.
people in other parts of the world are just like on fire and the church is growing. And, you know, so there's that. But then I'm also seeing a lot of optimism in the comments that even in the West, yeah, our culture is going in a direction, but I do think God is really strengthening his church and hopefully, God willing, preparing us so that we will have his grace to withstand, be faithful when that persecution comes, which it sure looks like it is coming.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, especially when you look at, you know, a couple hundred years ago, how Christians talk a little bit differently than we do now. You're like, maybe, you know, maybe we do need a little, to go through the fire a little bit and toughen us out a little bit.
Mm.
So who knows what God's purposes are for what's going on in Western civilization, at least. But we can, learn and grow, and maybe even, learn from our Chinese brothers and sisters, and, from different cultures around the world, and take advantage of the opportunity that God has given us in this, kind of turbulent season that we're experiencing.
Yeah. And one of the blessings that God has provided at this point in time is the internet. And not that I think that it's the total, replacement, obviously, of getting together. I think that physically getting together with other Christians is important, but what an awesome thing we can be connected, like you and me right now in different countries, having this conversation for edification. We can be interacting with people in countries all around the world. And I know last time that I did a live stream, someone mentioned they were listening from the Philippines. I think because of how late we started this time, most of that part of the world is sleeping.
Yeah, they're in bed.
But this time we're able to pull in some people from the West Coast, maybe. So that's good. Actually, I had someone say that I should be wearing a Dodgers hat. So yeah, definitely a West Coast person listening. But anyway, we're connected, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
What a blessing that is. And so, let's just, I hope, we're going to leave this conversation positive. We're basically saying, Dean and I both believe in the principle of freedom of conscience is what we're really getting at when we talk about religious freedom. But obviously, if you have people turning away from God as a culture, that's bad news for Christians. So we need to recognize, it looks like our culture has been headed in a very bad direction. Canada, from our perspective in America, is in the future. Like some people have pointed out that what happens up there eventually kind of trickles down. We see it happen here.
Just wait 12 years.
So Dean, you're going to be in jail first.
Yep.
And I'll pray for it's possible.
Hey, but I might get out with good behavior. I'm a nice guy.
Yeah. Well, they may try to convert. That's the irony of all this, is how they actually try to convert us to their way of thinking. Because I'm pretty sure James Coates could have left prison if he had just signed what they wanted him to sign.
Yeah. And
said, sure, I'll do what you want me to do. Right. That's always the, and I know that's not what you're saying. You're not going to, conform to something that's not, that's violating your convictions as a Christian. But that's the point, is like, that's what persecution, so often we see it manifested that way. It's the first Christians, right? What did they have to say? Caesar is Lord. And they said, no, Jesus is Lord. So we got to be ready. And I do believe that, there's definitely signs of growing potential for persecution, and even already some persecution that is taking place as the culture changes so much. So I'm just thankful, though, that we can be like talking like this, getting to know Christians in different places and have good conversations. So it doesn't look like people really had questions. I saw a lot of good comments tonight in the comment section. Again, if you didn't know, Dean, who's with me, has a channel. And let me see if I can pop that up one more time. There we go. So you're doing biblical theology for normal people. And what's your schedule? Like you're doing some live streaming.
Yeah, absolutely. I do a live stream every Monday afternoon, usually about like lunchtime, basically, called Theo Live. It's not my name. It's Theology Live. I don't know why that's so difficult for some people. They like to give me a hard time, Tim. But Theo Live, I'm really enjoying that. We basically talk about theology and like kind of a little bit of like the Christian news cycle, a little bit of commentary on that kind of stuff. So I do that every Monday, and then usually I try to do at least one, maybe two other videos throughout the week. So trying to keep like a Monday, at least Thursday kind of scenario, just like a couple videos. Don't want to flood everyone's, news boxes with, oh, he uploaded another one again.
like someone on the other side of the screen here that does that, right?
No, I wasn't talking about you, Tim. I'd never do that to you on your own channel.
Yeah, no, I know. But the other thing about your videos is that you use Mac equipment, so it also looks superior to my videos, right?
Yeah, looks pretty. Can't customize anything, but it looks pretty.
That's right. I'm over here coding my own pro. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not.
You've been pressing all the zeros and ones throughout this whole thing.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And for future people who watch this, feel free to leave your comments in the comment section. I will try, once the video is all uploaded, probably tomorrow, I may get to posting some links to some of the things that we talked about tonight, so you can look at it yourself on whatever computer you're using, whether a Mac or a Windows. We are open to all people.
That's great. Freedom of conscience, freedom of computer.
freedom of conscience. That's right. Even when it comes to computers. That's great. All right. Thank you, Dean. This was an awesome conversation. It was really fun to talk about these things.
Always fun to hang out with you.
God bless.